Welcome to Real Free News with Matt Wyman. Today we begin with the opening statement, a recent essay, and then a chapter summary from the new book, The White Imperative, followed by topical and select Redux reports, a historical review, and concluding with a relevant classical philosophical abstract. The White Imperative is a new book from the White Free Press. This groundbreaking volume on the foundations of racial survival and renewal is now available in ebook and hard copy from major online booksellers and the Real Free News store, links in the description. The complete audiobook is available free online, with a new chapter released daily on video hosting sites for the White Free Press. Stay tuned in for the next hour, because it is going to get real free news. The accumulative legal architecture of immunities and accountability shields that governed the COVID-19 response represents one of the most significant pre-positioned frameworks for enabling large-scale policy implementation with reduced risk of legal or civil repercussions. Decades of legislative enactments, judicial precedents, and administrative doctrines created a layered system of protections that effectively insulated government officials, public health agencies, pharmaceutical manufacturers, media organizations, technology platforms, hospitals, and educational institutions from meaningful accountability. Central to this structure were the Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness, PrEP Act, emergency use authorizations, public health emergency declarations, sovereign and qualified immunity doctrines, and expansive state-level emergency powers. These mechanisms, combined with narrow exceptions such as willful misconduct that proved exceptionally difficult to litigate, allowed the deployment of mask mandates, vaccine policies, lockdowns, school closures, and related interventions with practical impunity. This framework did not emerge in isolation or as a spontaneous reaction to the pandemic. It was constructed incrementally over decades through deliberate legislative and judicial action. The National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986 established a no-fault compensation program that largely removed vaccine manufacturers from traditional tort liability. Subsequent measures, including the PrEP Act of 2005 and repeated expansions during declared emergencies, further tailored protections for mass countermeasure deployment. Judicial doctrines granting deference to executive authority during crises reinforced this insulation. The result was a pre-existing environment in which actors could anticipate operating with broad legal safeguards when advancing policies that carried foreseeable risks of constitutional violations, excess mortality, medical injuries, and developmental harm to children. The strategic expansion of these immunities points to long-term planning and intentional design. Laws and institutional arrangements were positioned well in advance to facilitate precisely the conditions under which unprecedented societal measures could be executed with minimal fear of consequences. This pre-planning of the legal infrastructure itself constitutes an essential element of the broader coordination. Pharmaceutical companies, government agencies, global health organizations, financial interests, and media tech entities benefited from interlocking protections that covered development, distribution, promotion, censorship, and enforcement activities. By embedding these shields into the system, participants could advance measures while knowing that traditional avenues of redress had been systematically neutralized. This premeditated immunity architecture directly compounds the gravity of the offenses. When decision-makers operate with foreknowledge of layered protections, policies that produced widespread harm move beyond potential negligence into the realm of calculated action. The framework enabled what can be designated as COVID treason through the centralization of unconstitutional power, COVID murder through protocols and mandates foreseeably linked to preventable deaths, and COVID child abuse through medical and psychological interventions imposed on minors. The conscious exploitation of these safeguards, evident in the rapid invocation of PrEP Act declarations and emergency expansions, demonstrates malice and forethought rather than good faith error. The accumulation of immunities from the Reagan era through post-9/11 preparedness legislation reveals a trajectory toward creating a permissive environment for societal-scale experimentation shielded from accountability. The absence of robust oversight mechanisms further completed this architecture. Underfunded compensation programs with low claimant success rates, prosecutorial discretion, and judicial deference left affected individuals and families with limited recourse. This engineered impunity not only facilitated the response, but formed an integral component of the offenses themselves. The public record of legislative history, emergency declarations, and institutional coordination provides clear documentation of both the harms inflicted and the protective system designed to conceal and insulate them. To conclude, the pre-positioned legal framework of immunities and accountability shields stands as compelling evidence of deliberate planning within the COVID-19 response. Through decades of accumulated protections, including the 1986 Vaccine Injury Act, the PrEP Act, emergency powers doctrines, and supporting judicial precedents, key actors operated with assurance that their decisions would face minimal legal challenge. This structure enabled the advancement of policies constituting COVID treason, COVID murder, and COVID child abuse with built-in impunity, transforming potential policy missteps into a coordinated enterprise executed with foreknowledge of protection. The systematic neutralization of accountability mechanisms underscores the premeditated character of these actions and reinforces their status as imprescriptible offenses under any serious jurisprudential framework. Confronting this engineered architecture of immunity is essential to restoring constitutional order, moral responsibility, and public trust. Perpetual accountability remains the only proportionate response to harms that were planned, shielded, and inflicted on such a vast scale. Only through full recognition of this pre-designed system can the foundations of legitimate governance be reclaimed from the entrenched protections that enabled their subversion. The original report, the accumulative legal framework of immunities, and the engineered absence of accountability in the COVID response, with additional resources and comparable content, is available at Real Free News. The White Imperative, Chapter 5 Summary, Instinct, Will, and the Warrior Spirit. The survival instinct represents the most fundamental force in nature, an unyielding drive that demands conscious cultivation to secure the continued existence and flourishing of the white race. This primal essence, when elevated by disciplined will, manifests as the warrior spirit, the historic source of innovation, exploration, conquest, and civilizational order. In an age dominated by distraction, self-indulgence, and cultural messages that prioritize comfort over duty, the vital task is to reawaken this instinct and direct it toward unwavering racial loyalty, family continuity, and collective strength. Reclamation begins with education rooted in ancestral values, discipline forged in hardship, courage in adversity, and sacrifice for posterity. Strong families, where fathers model strength and mothers nurture future generations, form the foundation. Cultural expressions in art, literature, and tradition must celebrate the white man as guardian of blood and soil, while physical and mental training restore resilience and purpose. Reproduction within the race preserves the unique heritage of creativity and achievement that defines this people. The white race possesses the genetic and historical foundation to master instinct through will, transforming survival into purposeful dominion. By prioritizing racial unity, traditional roles, and communal loyalty, it will overcome present challenges and secure a future of excellence and endurance. In summary, the full awakening of instinct, will, and the warrior spirit is not optional but essential, the path to renewal, dominance, and eternal legacy for the white race. The full White Imperative, Chapter 5, Instinct, Will, and the Warrior Spirit is available to listen to for free online at the White Free Press, while the complete book can be purchased in ebook or hard copy from major internet booksellers and the Real Free News store.
The doctrine of equality stands in direct opposition to every observable fact in the natural world. Nature functions through variation and hierarchy, not uniformity, and enforced equality suppresses white excellence in science, art, and governance while diluting the genetic foundations of high civilization. Forced integration and race mixing accelerate measurable decline in standards, trust, and achievement. Rejecting this illusion restores natural order and unlocks the race's true potential. This is the White Imperative. The audiobook is available free online, and the hard copy and ebook are available at internet booksellers and the White Free Press.
The documented and accelerating impacts of both legal and illegal immigration constitute a profound transformation of the United States. The record-shattering influx since 2020, building upon 5 decades of escalating policy choices, has produced interlocking challenges that demand immediate, decisive action. America does not require additional immigration. It requires resolute protection of the sovereign nation and way of life established by its founders. Mass immigration has driven the most rapid demographic transformation in modern history. Legal admissions combined with sustained illegal crossings have shifted the nation's ethnic and cultural composition at an unprecedented pace. Native-born Americans of European descent are becoming minorities in multiple states and are projected to hold that status nationwide within a generation. This change is fundamentally altering neighborhoods, traditions, shared history, and the very concept of a cohesive American people. Public safety has deteriorated in communities experiencing high immigration levels. Crime rates, including violent offenses, gang activity such as MS-13 operations, drug trafficking, particularly fentanyl, and terrorism-related encounters, have risen disproportionately. These pressures have strained law enforcement, courts, and correctional systems, rendering once stable public spaces less secure for American families. Economically, the effects are equally severe. Immigrants have entered key sectors including construction, manufacturing, services, and agriculture, displacing native workers, suppressing wages, and contributing to a substantial net fiscal drain. Government services in education, healthcare, housing, and welfare are consumed at rates exceeding tax contributions from these populations, burdening taxpayers and accelerating pressure on the middle class. Housing markets face artificial demand surges, resulting in overcrowding, elevated rents, reduced homeownership opportunities for young Americans, and infrastructure strain. Welfare dependency further compounds fiscal challenges, with programs such as Medicaid, SNAP, and public education absorbing billions annually in states already confronting budget shortfalls. Politically, pathways to citizenship have enabled shifts in voting patterns and office holding that favor expanded immigration policies, creating self-reinforcing cycles. Culturally, English proficiency and assimilation have declined, while imported norms have lowered standards of behavior, education, and civility. Community cohesion has eroded as ethnic enclaves replace integrated neighborhoods, diminishing social trust. Weaponized historical grievances have intensified institutional conflicts and identity-based competitions. The cumulative outcome is a measurable decline in societal quality, reduced safety, prosperity, cohesion, and livability. In summary, these 10 interlocking realities, demographic transformation, crime and safety erosion, economic displacement, housing crisis, welfare strain, political reconfiguration, cultural decline, communal fragmentation, grievance-driven division, and overall societal lowering define the present condition of the United States. The time for half measures has passed. An immediate and total halt to all immigration, legal and illegal, combined with robust enforcement including deportations, secure borders, elimination of chain migration and birthright citizenship for non-citizens, English-only requirements, and firm assimilation standards represents the essential path to recovery. America must act decisively to safeguard its heritage, citizens, and future before these changes become irreversible. The original report, Top 10 Devastating Impacts of Both Illegal and Legal Immigration in America, Why It Must End Now, with additional resources and comparable content, is available at Real Free News. True leaders are not defined by how loudly they speak or how charismatic they appear in a crowd. Decisiveness as the quiet cornerstone of leadership that turns uncertainty into direction and hesitation into momentum. Whether guiding a family, team, or your own life, one clear choice inspires trust, raises standards, and creates contagious forward energy. History, from Stoic philosophers to modern icons, shows decisive leaders accept risk, yet move forward with principle, fostering engagement and agility. Develop it daily through small practices and reflection, and watch your influence grow as others follow your steady example. Decisiveness is not volume, it is resolve. Experience the power of one decision. The audiobook is available free online, hard copy and ebook available at internet booksellers. The New World Order constitutes a coordinated, operational architecture of global control that has advanced far beyond speculation to become a defining reality of our time. This network operates through systematic deception, institutional capture, and the incremental erosion of individual liberty and national sovereignty. Its primary instrument is an extensive apparatus of misinformation and narrative control. Media institutions and digital platforms function as aligned channels that propagate carefully curated stories, selectively omitting facts and synchronizing messaging during periods of crisis. The result is a manufactured consensus that frames centralized global governance as both inevitable and benevolent, steadily undermining the foundations of self-governance and personal autonomy. This agenda proceeds through the methodical dismantling of personal freedoms. Legal and regulatory frameworks are being revised under the pretext of public health, climate imperatives, and economic stability to expand surveillance, restrict privacy, and curtail fundamental rights to speech, assembly, and self-defense. Privacy has been rendered obsolete as monitoring technologies permeate daily life, creating a comprehensive environment in which behavior is tracked, predicted, and shaped at scale. Citizens are being conditioned into dependency on centralized systems where compliance becomes the price of security and opportunity. Education has been repurposed as a tool of conformity rather than enlightenment. Curricula increasingly prioritize global citizenship, emotional alignment, and obedience to authority over critical thinking, national identity, and individual initiative. Parallel economic restructuring ensures that traditional employment is destabilized, job security eroded, and survival tied directly to alignment with the approved framework. Individuals are transformed from sovereign actors into manageable components whose worth is measured solely by their utility to the larger design. Most alarming is the evidence of a deliberate depopulation strategy. Policies governing health, agriculture, environmental regulation, and resource allocation consistently align with objectives that reduce population growth and, in targeted instances, overall population levels. These measures are presented as sustainability initiatives or crisis responses, yet their cumulative impact reveals a calculated intent to manage humanity as a controllable resource rather than safeguard it as a free and sovereign population. The New World Order advances through patience and incrementalism, exploiting crises to justify greater centralization while positioning itself as the indispensable solution. Its ultimate vision is a uniform global order in which creativity, individuality, and liberty are subordinated to the interests of a self-appointed elite. In conclusion, the New World Order represents one of the most profound threats to human freedom in modern history. Its systematic campaign of deception, surveillance, and engineered dependency is reshaping civilization into a controlled, depopulated, and spiritually diminished society. Recognition of this reality is not optional. It is the essential precondition for any meaningful defense of sovereignty, liberty, and self-determination. The trajectory is clear, the mechanisms are in motion, and the stakes are nothing less than the future of humanity itself. Awareness must now translate into resolute vigilance if the encroaching darkness is to be confronted before it becomes irreversible. To explore the full original report, Discovering the Darkness of the New World Order, plus additional insights and related content, visit Real Free News. Justice required that strength serve righteousness, never whim or personal gain. In the Citadel's Great Hall, the knight weighed evidence and intent under torchlight, balancing custom, canon law, severity, and mercy. This chapter shows justice as the virtue preventing tyranny, enforced through prudent verdicts and supported by the sword when needed. William Marshall's Regency and Ramon Lull's teachings highlight how fair rule built loyalty, deterred crime, and mirrored divine order. Generosity and compassion tempered strictness, transforming raw power into legitimate authority that sustained stable realms. This is the Citadel Code. The audiobook is available free online, hard copy, and ebook available at internet booksellers. The ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920 marked a pivotal expansion of the electorate that fundamentally reshaped the trajectory of American society. By enfranchising millions of women, this constitutional change introduced a powerful new voting bloc whose influence quickly manifested across multiple domains of public policy. Far from a neutral addition to democratic participation, women's suffrage established a consistent pattern of support for expansive government intervention, moralistic regulation, and redistributive priorities. The surge in women's electoral participation produced a legacy of economic strain, social disruption, and institutional overreach that continues to define contemporary challenges. From the outset, women's votes propelled transformative policies with measurable consequences. In the realm of taxation and economic redistribution, female electoral strength by the 1930s accelerated progressive taxation and wealth transfer programs. These measures collected vast sums, but simultaneously slowed business expansion, accelerated capital flight, and entrenched long-term deficits. Dependency structures deepened, diminishing workforce incentives and fostering structural stagnation that persists in today's fiscal imbalances. Criminal justice policy followed a parallel course. By the 1980s, Women's consistent backing of law and order initiatives contributed to stricter sentencing frameworks, dramatically increasing incarceration rates. While intended to promote safety, these policies generated ballooning costs, family fragmentation, and elevated recidivism, producing a punitive system whose inefficiencies and societal costs remain evident. Immigration policy shifted decisively under the influence of women's votes, particularly through the 1960s reforms that prioritized inclusivity. The resulting increases in both legal and illegal inflows placed substantial pressure on wages, employment markets, housing availability, and urban infrastructure. These demographic changes strained social cohesion and public resources in ways that continue to challenge national identity and economic equilibrium. Civil rights expansions, strongly supported by female voters, produced landmark anti-discrimination measures. Yet the implementation phase brought urban unrest, demographic shifts in major cities, eroded tax bases, and persistent intergroup tensions. Affirmative frameworks generated legal conflicts and workplace resentments that have compounded rather than resolved underlying divisions. Environmental regulations advanced rapidly with women's electoral weight behind green initiatives in the 1970s. Industry closures, regional economic decline, elevated energy costs, and manufacturing contraction followed, illustrating the tangible trade-offs between regulatory ambition and prosperity. Similar patterns appear in social welfare programs, where suffrage-era compassion translated into expansive entitlement systems. Despite significant expenditures, these initiatives yielded limited reductions in poverty while cultivating dependency and imposing heavy fiscal burdens on working taxpayers. In healthcare and reproductive policy, women's advocacy secured broad public programs and landmark autonomy measures. These developments drove costs upward, expanded dependency, and introduced deep cultural divisions that have polarized public life for decades. Education reforms similarly expanded access and compliance mandates, but produced inefficiencies, administrative bloat, gender-specific disruptions in athletics and programming, and uneven outcomes that prioritized equity metrics over educational excellence. Labor and workplace protections, enacted with strong female support during the New Deal period, imposed wage and hour standards that constrained small business flexibility and contributed to higher unemployment in vulnerable sectors. Early temperance activism linked directly to suffrage delivered the culminating example: nationwide prohibition. The 18th Amendment and subsequent alcohol regulations generated black market crime waves, judicial overload, lost revenue, and diminished personal liberties. Patterns echoed in later restrictive policies. Conclusion: the historical evidence demonstrates that the 19th Amendment unleashed a sustained electoral dynamic favoring expansive government, regulatory ambition, and redistributive ethics. Across taxation, criminal justice, immigration, civil rights, environmental policy, welfare, healthcare, education, labor, and alcohol regulation, women's voting power consistently advanced measures whose cumulative effect has been increased state authority, elevated fiscal burdens, and eroded individual and economic freedoms. This century-long pattern reflects the power of organized moral conviction translated into policy without sufficient regard for unintended consequences. As America confronts ongoing challenges of debt, division, and diminished dynamism, the legacy of 1920 stands as a sobering reminder of how electoral expansion can fundamentally redirect national priorities. Recognizing this record with clarity is essential to any serious conversation about restoring balance, prosperity, and liberty in the Republic. For the original source report, Top 10 Issues Women's Voting Has Influenced and the Negative Fallout, along with extra resources and similar material, visit Real Free News. You do not need complicated systems or elaborate tools to make powerful choices that shape your life. A simple, reliable inner compass, built on 3 guiding questions: does this align with who I am becoming? Will this move me closer to the life I want to lead? Am I willing to own the outcome and adjust as needed? Ask them before any choice in relationships, health, work, or leadership, and watch scattered thoughts become focused action. The framework requires only honest reflection and daily practice, turning emotion-driven decisions into intentional ones that build self-mastery and direction. Integrate it today and experience how one aligned choice quietly reshapes everything. This is the power of one decision. The audiobook is available free online, hard copy and ebook, available at internet booksellers and mattwyman.com. Hate crime laws in the United States constitute a subversive legal framework deliberately engineered during the 1960s civil rights era to embed subjective, adaptable standards that enable selective enforcement, political manipulation, and long-term societal transformation. These statutes, beginning with the Civil Rights Act of 1968 and expanded through subsequent legislation, prioritize nebulous bias motivation over objective criminal conduct, creating a system where prosecutors wield enormous discretion to elevate or ignore offenses based on protected characteristics and political expediency. Jewish leaders and organizations played a central, disproportionate role in crafting and advancing this architecture, embedding flexibility that has allowed these laws to evolve into powerful instruments of control by 2026. Representative Emanuel Seller, chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, and Senator Jacob Javits spearheaded key measures including the Civil Rights Acts of 1960, 1964, and 1968, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. Organizations such as the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, AIAS, American Jewish Committee, Anti-Defamation League, ADL, and American Jewish Congress provided relentless lobbying, legal expertise, and funding. These entities, representing a demographic comprising roughly 2% of the population, exerted outsized influence through the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights and direct legislative drafting. The 1968 Act's title, I introduced vague bias provisions that shifted legal focus from the Act itself to subjective intent, a design that invited future reinterpretation and selective application. This foundation enabled the law's expansion to encompass sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, and other categories, transforming them into tools that blur the line between protected speech and criminality. By 2026, the subversive impact is unmistakable. FBI data reveals stark disparities in enforcement. Anti-black incidents receive aggressive prosecution, while anti-white cases face over a 40% higher declination rate, not counting miscounting. Prosecutors routinely elevate minor verbal disputes involving certain protected groups into felony hate crimes, using decades-old social media posts or ambiguous statements as evidence. Yet comparable or more severe offenses against white victims, such as the 2025 Ohio case involving a black suspect and explicit slurs, often proceed without hate enhancements. This selective application undermines equal justice and chills free expression, exactly as the vague statutory language permits. The ADL's model statutes and ongoing advocacy further refined this framework, ensuring prosecutors retain maximum interpretive power while shielding the system from meaningful oversight. HAOS exemplifies the long-term transformative strategy. Having lobbied aggressively for the 1965 Immigration Act's abolition of national origin quotas, the organization now facilitates mass migration, aiding hundreds of thousands of cases annually and opposing enforcement measures. The family reunification provisions of the 1965 law, combined with the anti-discrimination ethos of the 1968 Act, created open pathways for chain migration that now account for the majority of entries. This continuity demonstrates how the original legislation was structured with built-in adaptability to support evolving agendas, including demographic shifts that strain social cohesion and resource allocation. Jewish-led groups consistently frame border enforcement as discriminatory, leveraging the same civil rights precedents to challenge policies that prioritize American sovereignty. The design of these laws reveals intentional ambiguity. Terms such as because of bias lack precise parameters, granting prosecutors and judges broad latitude to infer motive from context, history, or association. This subjectivity erodes legal clarity, fosters public distrust, and enables political weaponization. Cases proliferate where protected groups receive enhanced charges for speech or minor altercations, while violence against unprotected groups is downplayed or reclassified. Judicial immunity and prosecutorial discretion further insulate the system, allowing abuse without accountability. The cumulative effect is a legal regime that destabilizes societal trust, divides communities along protected characteristics, and advances agendas of demographic and cultural transformation under the guise of equity. In conclusion, hate crime laws in the United States originated as a calculated legislative project shaped by Jewish leadership and organizations to embed subjective standards capable of long-term subversion. From the foundational work of Seller and Javits through the expansive advocacy of the ADL, AJC, and HAOS, these statutes evolved into mechanisms that prioritize selective enforcement, suppress dissenting speech, and facilitate demographic change. The resulting disparities, evident in prosecution rates, charging decisions, and immigration outcomes demonstrate a framework engineered for flexibility rather than fairness. By 2026, these laws have achieved their transformative impact, eroding equal justice, fostering societal division, and undermining national cohesion. Recognition of their subversive roots and ongoing effects is essential to restoring objective legal standards, protecting free speech, and reclaiming a system grounded in equal application of law rather than political interpretation. Only by confronting this architecture can American jurisprudence return to principles of clarity, neutrality, and genuine justice for all citizens. The original report, Hate Crime Laws in the United States, The Subversive Roots and Transformative Impact, with additional resources and comparable content, is available at Real Free News. Honor formed the bedrock of the knight and noble's existence. It meant a man's word stood as solid as the citadel's curtain walls, unyielding against every assault. This chapter reveals honor as both inherited reputation and daily discipline, demanding truth in counsel, fidelity to oaths, and integrity even when costly. Through vivid examples like the Song of Roland and the life of William Marshall, it shows how honor elevated the sword from tool of violence to instrument of righteousness, shaping judgments, tournaments, and self-examination within the citadel. Lost honor brought ruin far beyond lost lands. Preserved honor forged trust, legacy, and moral architecture for all other virtues. This is the Citadel Code. The audiobook is available free online, hard copy and ebook available at internet booksellers. Racial recognition constitutes a fundamental and inescapable feature of human cognition and institutional operation. The term racist, properly understood through its etymological and semantic structure as racist, precisely designates this reality: an individual who incorporates race. The categorization of humans by observable physical traits, ancestry, and shared characteristics into thought processes and decision-making. Far from an aberration or moral failing, this incorporation reflects a standard cognitive mechanism reinforced by legal systems that routinely treat race as a concrete, operational category. A synthesized examination of the term's architecture, historical development, and contemporary function reveals a unified framework in which racial awareness persists across all participants in discourse, regardless of rhetorical positioning. This position affirms the descriptive accuracy and cognitive universality of racist recognition, while highlighting the structural inconsistencies that arise from selective application and subjective moral framing. The root race denotes the grouping of humans according to inherited physical markers, such as skin color, facial features, hair texture, and geographic ancestry. Dictionaries and historical usage consistently anchor this definition in observable, heritable differences that have served as the basis for human classification. The suffix "ist" functions as an agentive morpheme indicating belief in, adherence to, or advocacy for the root concept. Combined, racist identifies those who regard racial categories as significant determinants in human variation and affairs. This construction aligns with parallel formations, such as capitalist or socialist, where the suffix denotes ideological or practical commitment rather than mere observation. The hyphenated rendering, racist, clarifies this logical architecture, separating the empirical foundation of racial grouping from the active cognitive incorporation of that grouping into judgment and policy. Recognition of race thereby emerges not as optional ideology, but as an inherent pattern recognition process embedded in human perception and institutional practice. Legal systems worldwide embed race as a binding operational category. Statutes employ racial classifications for census enumeration, voting district apportionment, civil rights enforcement, protected class designations, and bias-motivated crime enhancements. Courts adjudicate outcomes by reference to these categories as lawful criteria. Even policies framed as minimizing racial consideration must first measure and identify racial groups to achieve their ends, creating a structural duality. Race operates as literal legal reality in one domain while being rhetorically suspended in another. This duality underscores that complete removal of racial recognition from decision-making is structurally impossible. Legal frameworks thus affirm race as a functional determinant, mirroring the cognitive reality denoted by racist. Historical classifications further illustrate the enduring salience of racial categorization. 18th century systems by Linnaeus and Blumenbach organized humanity into varieties based on observable traits and continental origins, associating physical markers with behavioral and temperamental patterns. These taxonomies, Europaeus, Africanus, Asiaticus, Americanus, and later refinements into Caucasoid, Mongoloid, Negroid, and others, established race as a determinate framework that influenced subsequent anthropological and social thought. Though scientific understanding has evolved, the observable clustering of traits by ancestry persists as a basis for pattern recognition. The term racist captures advocacy for or belief in the explanatory power of these patterns, a stance rooted in centuries of systematic observation rather than invention. The word racist entered English in the early 20th century, building on racism from 1902 to 1903 and replacing earlier racialist. Dictionary definitions from the 1930s onward consistently denote belief that racial differences determine inherent traits, capacities, or worth, often noting associated assumptions of hierarchy or discrimination. Later expansions incorporated institutional or systemic dimensions, yet the core denotation, advocacy for race as a primary explanatory category, remains stable. This technical fidelity distinguishes denotation from connotation. The literal meaning identifies cognitive incorporation of racial factors, accumulated usage layers pejorative judgment, framing such incorporation as inherently prejudicial. The distinction reveals that accusations of racism frequently rely on the very racial observation they condemn. The accuser must perceive and categorize the target's racial characteristics to formulate the charge, thereby engaging in the identical cognitive operation. Subjective morality compounds this architecture. Claims of moral elevation through non-discrimination still require racial observation to identify purported instances of bias and to implement corrective measures, including targeted preferences or protections. When race is invoked positively to advance specific groups in hiring, admissions, or resource allocation, the same determinative logic operates. Both the labeled individual and the labeler treat race as relevant. They differ only in direction, justification, and contextual framing. The accusation does not eliminate racial recognition but redirects it, often asserting evaluative primacy through selective application. Contextual factors, legal, political, cultural, determine which uses of race are deemed legitimate and which are labeled objectionable. This selectivity rests on subjective standards rather than objective consistency, positioning the term racist as a rhetorical mechanism within a shared system of racial awareness. Multifaceted interactions among accuser, accused, and observers further demonstrate the universality of this framework. Accusers apply the label to highlight perceived racial incorporation by the target. The accused may reject, defend, or reclaim it. Third parties interpret the exchange through their own cognitive lenses. Mutual accusations create reciprocal dynamics in which both parties employ racial categorization. Self-identification and linguistic reappropriation occur when individuals align with dictionary components, treating race as a meaningful human characteristic, and embrace the term as descriptor of their worldview. Such reclamation transforms a stigmatizing label into one of identity or affirmation, underscoring that the underlying cognitive operation remains constant across positions. Additional parameters enrich the architecture. Situational relativity shows that racial awareness varies by context, yet remains available as a heuristic. Cognitive universality of pattern recognition positions racial cues among instinctive mechanisms for processing social information efficiently. Tension between personal belief and external labeling highlights how self-perceived adherence diverges from imposed interpretations. Intent influences application. Accusatory uses seek dominance, while self-descriptive uses affirm identity. Power asymmetries in definitional authority shift according to institutional or cultural settings. Collectively, these elements illustrate racist as both technical descriptor and socially negotiated label, operating within an inescapable system of human differentiation. The persistence of racial recognition across legal, cognitive, historical, and discursive domains affirms its status as inherent rather than aberrant. Every engagement with the term, whether accusation, defense, or reclamation, reaffirms the significance of race as a human characteristic. Attempts to suspend or reframe it inevitably invoke the same categories they seek to diminish, revealing the structural impossibility of true racelessness in thought or policy. The architecture of racist, therefore, stands as a coherent, self-reinforcing reality. Race supplies observable material. Ist marks its incorporation into cognition and action. Legal systems operationalize it, and discourse redistributes its application according to subjective contexts. In summation, the logical and linguistic architecture of racist establishes racial recognition as an enduring inherent feature of human cognition and institutional function. Constructed from race as empirical categorization by ancestry and observable traits, and ist as belief or advocacy for that categorization's significance, the term accurately describes the universal incorporation of racial factors into decision-making. Legal systems treat race as a binding operational reality for census, rights enforcement, and resource allocation, while subjective frameworks selectively frame its use. Historical classifications, dictionary evolution, and contemporary interactions all converge on the same truth. Participants across roles, accusers, accused, and observers, engage in identical cognitive operations, differing only in justification and direction. Denotation endures beneath connotative layers, enabling both precise description and personal reclamation. This framework persists because racial awareness serves as a stable heuristic and legal instrument within human differentiation. Recognition of this architecture promotes clarity in discourse by affirming what is empirically and structurally evident rather than pursuing illusory suspension. Embracing the descriptive power of racist as cognitive and legal reality offers a coherent foundation for understanding human variation and institutional practice, free from the contradictions of selective denial. In an era demanding precision, this position upholds the integrity of observable reality and the linguistic tools that name it. Read the foundational reports, The Logical Architecture of Racial Recognition, Racist, as Inherent, Cognitive, and Legal Reality, and a comprehensive etymological and semantic analysis of racist, along with further resources and aligned content by going to Real Free News. These qualities form an integrated whole, each supporting and strengthening the others. Practical wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance create the unshakable inner character at the heart of human flourishing. Cultivated through small repeated actions, they bring clarity, strength, fairness, and balance to daily existence. These four virtues thread through every chapter, giving practical shape to sovereignty, thought-feeling action cycles, habit formation, purposeful direction, emotional resilience, reflection, modeling, adversity alchemy, and the fully integrated life. The complete audiobook is available free online with hardcover and ebook editions ready at leading online retailers. The phenomenon documented as COVID-19, which first appeared in late 2019, was never a spontaneous viral outbreak or isolated laboratory incident. It represented the deliberate culmination of a meticulously engineered, multi-generational plan whose singular objective has remained unchanged for centuries: the establishment of total dominion over humanity and the world itself. This plan, rooted in an ancient and unrelenting ambition to rule, wove biological, psychological, economic, and political instruments into a seamless mechanism of control. Whether a physical pathogen existed in the precise form later described matters far less than the orchestrated exploitation of global interconnectedness, fear, and institutional fragility that reshaped societies overnight. What history records as a pandemic was, in truth, the precise execution of a strategy honed across millennia, designed to disrupt, centralize, and consolidate authority on a planetary scale. The timing, scope, and synchronized global response were no accident, but the fulfillment of a vision that had patiently awaited the conditions of modernity: dense populations, instantaneous communication, economic interdependence, and advanced technological levers to bend reality to its will. The ambition to rule the world first stirred in the shadowed recesses of prehistory, when the earliest human societies confronted the chaos of survival. In those primordial settings, a visionary leader, perhaps a chieftain atop a hill, or a shaman invoking unseen forces, envisioned a unified domain under singular command. The world at that time was limited to the reach of voice or arrow, yet the impulse to dominate it was boundless. Power rested on strength, ritual, and the promise of protection, yet certain minds discerned that lasting dominion required more than transient allegiance. It demanded the unification of wills, the suppression of dissent, and the forging of a shared destiny. This embryonic idea survived through oral traditions, enigmatic markings on stone, and the rites of nascent cults. Its resilience stemmed from its universality, an ambition capable of adapting to any culture or epoch. As civilizations emerged along the Tigris and Euphrates, the fertile Nile, or the Central Asian steppes, the vision expanded in tandem with expanding horizons. Conquests such as those of Sargon of Akkad or the divine claims of Egyptian pharaohs, alongside the societal harmonies articulated by Confucius or the hegemonic dreams of Greek city-states, echoed its call. The idea persisted not as a single doctrine, but as a recurring impulse, transmitted invisibly by travelers, scribes, and secret keepers who recognized its latent power. By the Iron Age, it surfaced in cryptic forms, prophecies etched on Babylonian tablets, pacts among tribal elders, or oracular riddles thriving in the margins of empires that rose and fell. Each iteration refined the concept of a manageable domain, sowing the seed that would one day germinate as COVID-19. Centuries of refinement transformed this raw aspiration into a calculated, multifaceted plan. The collapse of early empires demonstrated that brute conquest alone could not sustain control over an ever-widening world. The plan's inheritors, rulers, philosophers, and unseen stewards, shifted towards subtler instruments, ideology as unifier, fear as catalyst, and economic interdependence as lever. In the medieval era, the Catholic Church illustrated how a shared creed could transcend borders, its crusades and tithes offering early templates for centralized authority. Trade routes, from the Silk Roads to spice trails, further expanded the known world, allowing Venetian and Genoese bankers to pull economic strings that shaped distant societies. The Renaissance and Enlightenment supplied intellectual tools. Machiavelli's Science of Power, Locke's Social Contract, and Rousseau's General Will each contributed methods to bend collective behavior without constant bloodshed. Colonial empires tested global reach, their successes and failures, teaching the limits of overt force. Science, from Newton's mechanics to Pasteur's germ theory, introduced invisible weapons more potent than cannons. The Industrial Age accelerated everything. Railroads, telegraphs, and steamships shrank distances, creating a web of commerce that the plan could exploit. Pandemics, such as cholera and the precedents of the Spanish flu, revealed how disruption could consolidate power. By the 20th century, mass media, global conflicts, and emerging technologies, computers, satellites, genetic engineering provided precision instruments. The plan no longer required armies, it operated through synchronized crises propaganda and institutional capture. Its stewards, whether a continuous lineage or successive rediscoverers of the same imperative, distilled history's lessons into a strategy of elegance and reach. COVID-19 emerged as the perfected instrument, a phenomenon that could masquerade as chance while exploiting every vulnerability of a hyper-connected globe. By the early 21st century, the plan had crystallized into the architecture of COVID-19 itself. Advances in virology, systems theory, and behavioral science supplied the blueprint. Whether a biological agent was released or a narrative of threat was sufficient, the effect remained identical. Rapid dissemination of fear amplified by instantaneous media, economic paralysis through coordinated shutdowns, and political centralization via emergency decrees. The design exploited globalization's fragile sinews, supply chains, financial markets, and digital networks to create cascading failures that funneled authority upward. Lockdowns, masking protocols, and vaccine mandates were not reactive measures, but integral components engineered to normalize obedience, fracture social bonds, and accustom populations to surveillance and compliance. Timing was exact, amid pre-existing anxieties over climate, inequality, and geopolitical tension. The phenomenon struck with surgical precision. Its adaptability was its genius. It could manifest as a virus, a rumor cascade, or a policy avalanche, each variant advancing the same end. The result was a world temporarily halted, then reconfigured under a unified framework of control. The rollout in late 2019 demonstrated the plan's triumphant execution. Governments across continents invoked identical measures, citing a common threat that dissolved traditional rivalries. Political sovereignty eroded as emergency powers concentrated decision-making in executive hands and supranational bodies. Economically, small enterprises collapsed while megacorporations and pharmaceutical entities consolidated market dominance through bailouts and exclusive contracts. Supply chains fractured, exposing vulnerabilities that funneled wealth and dependency towards centralized nodes. Socially, isolation severed communal ties, digital platforms replaced physical interaction under monitored conditions, and dissent was pathologized as reckless, enforcing a uniformity of thought. Geopolitically, borders softened not through conquest but through synchronized policy, forging a de facto planetary authority. Nations traded autonomy for inclusion in the new order, their rivalries subordinated to the shared imperative of crisis management. Biological reality, whatever its precise nature, became secondary. The phenomenon's power resided in its capacity to remold systems, perceptions, and behaviors on a global scale. What swords and edicts had failed to achieve across millennia, this orchestrated disruption accomplished in months. A world without meaningful fracture, primed for enduring dominion. In summary, COVID-19 stands as the ultimate realization of an ambition conceived in humanity's distant past, the desire to rule the world. This was no random event, but the deliberate endpoint of a strategy refined through prehistory's tribal visions, antiquity's empires, medieval ideologies, Enlightenment reason, industrial connectivity, and 20th century technological mastery. Each era contributed its lessons, shifting the plan from crude coercion to systemic orchestration. The phenomenon exploited modernity's own creations, global networks, scientific capability, and psychological levers to centralize political authority, consolidate economic power, re-engineer social relations, and erase geopolitical divisions. Fear became glue, compliance the norm, and interdependence the chain. Biological details, whether real or constructed, served merely as the catalyst for a deeper transformation, the quiet replacement of a mosaic of sovereign wills with a singular, manageable domain. The stewards of this vision, lost to explicit record yet evident in outcomes, demonstrated extraordinary patience and foresight. Their plan required no constant hand once set in motion. It harnessed humanity's own structures to complete its work. In its wake lies a transformed globe, wealth concentrated, liberties conditioned, and authority subtly unified, bearing the indelible mark of an idea that outlasted empires and finally claimed the world it had always sought. This is the clear and inescapable reality of what history has labeled COVID-19, not a pandemic, but the triumph of a plan centuries in the making. For the accompanying report, Original COVID Origins, along with additional resources and similar content, visit Real Free News.
Nature operates according to immutable laws that govern all living things, laws etched into the very fabric of existence and unyielding to human whim or desire. These eternal principles demand the preservation of one's own kind, as blood carries the sacred essence of civilization, creativity, and order that has defined white achievement across millennia. History reveals that empires rose through racial fidelity and fell through dilution, teaching that genetic integrity forms the bedrock of lasting greatness. Nature rewards the vigilant who defend their lineage and punishes those who weaken it. This is the white imperative. The audiobook is available free online, and the hard copy and ebook are available at internet booksellers and the White Free Press.
The Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi, the Ground Book. In this book, I lay the foundation of the way of strategy. As the ground supports all things, so must a warrior build a broad and solid base. Strategy is not only for the battlefield, it is the craft of the warrior in all things. You must study the principles deeply, train body and mind without cease, and see the world as it truly is. Pay attention to small things and do nothing useless. The true way is simple, yet demands complete dedication. He who masters the ground understands that all strategy begins with strong fundamentals. From this root, all techniques and victories grow naturally. Without this foundation, even the sharpest sword is useless. Study this well and make it part of your being. The Water Book. Here I explain the spirit of my strategy through the nature of water. Water flows around obstacles, takes the shape of any vessel, yet remains powerful, and unstoppable. In combat, you must be the same, flexible in mind and body, calm yet ready to strike with full force. I teach the correct attitudes, footwork, grip, and timing of the long sword. Your mind must remain free, without fixed forms. Adapt instantly to the enemy's movement as water follows the land. When you understand the rhythm of water, you will know how to defeat any opponent without wasted effort. This is the heart of practical technique. Practice until these principles become natural as breathing. The Fire Book. In the Fire Book, I reveal the heart of actual combat. Fire is fierce, sudden, and consuming. So must your fighting spirit be. I set down the ways of initiative, timing, and decisive striking. You must understand how to take the advantage, how to press an attack without pause, and how to read the enemy's intention in a single glance. Whether facing one man or many, the principles remain the same. Control the space, control the rhythm, and strike at the right moment with overwhelming force. Fire teaches that hesitation is death. Move with purpose and destroy doubt. When you master the fire, victory becomes certain in the heat of battle. The Wind Book. This book examines the ways of other schools of strategy. Wind represents tradition and the methods of others. To know your own way truly, you must understand the strengths and weaknesses of different approaches. Some schools rely on strength, others on technique or trickery. I show where these paths are narrow or mistaken, so that you do not fall into the same limitations. A warrior who only knows his own school is incomplete. Study the wind to see clearly what is effective and what is empty show. Use this knowledge to make your own strategy broader and stronger. True mastery includes knowing what to avoid as much as what to embrace. The Book of the Void. In the Book of the Void, I speak of that which has no form. The void is the ultimate truth beyond technique and thought. When you have trained thoroughly in the 4 previous books, you reach a state where the mind is free of all attachment. There is no longer I or enemy, only correct action arising naturally. This is the highest level of strategy. The void contains everything and nothing. He who dwells in the void acts without hesitation, fear, or doubt. All things become clear. This is the final teaching of the way, to reach emptiness and from emptiness produce perfect action. Study deeply until you understand what cannot be spoken. Thank you for tuning in to Real Free News with Matt Wyman. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and write what you think in the comment section. View past reports and the 24/7 live stream on the video hosting platforms. Check out the Real Free News store for real free food, books, merch, and more, including The White Imperative. The ebook and hard copy are available at internet booksellers and the Real Free News store. The audiobook is free online at the video hosting sites for the White Free Press, with a new chapter dropping daily. Tune in again, and until then, remember to keep it real, free news.